I want to start today in talking about a new poll that just came out, our new Swing State Project poll, which we just released this morning. I'm going to walk through some of the top line numbers, and then I'm going to bring out our talented editorial team that Adrian mentioned to get into some more nuanced analysis of what we found, especially some of the trend lines that we found in this poll, as well as getting into the stuff that I know many of you are here for, which is the down-ballot races, the control of the House and the Senate, and what we are seeing there with Jessica and Aaron and David. And then, of course, we're going to leave a lot of time for audience questions. It is probably our favorite part of doing these events, is hearing from you, our subscribers, and getting questions as well from not just from here in the room, but virtually as well. For any media who are here in the audience, this is an off-the-record briefing, but if you're looking for a quote, you can find Becca Kaufman. She's in the back of the room for those of you who are here. For those of you who are not here and would like to talk to any of the editors on the record, please reach out to her via email and she can facilitate that after the program. So let's start off. I'm going to try to, oh, well, look at this. It's already up on the screen. This is the top line number here in our latest Swing State Project poll. This is something of a first for the Cook Political Report. We are working with two fantastic polling operations, the Benenson Strategy Group, which is a Democratic polling firm, and GS Strategy Group, which is a Republican polling firm. Both of them have a tremendous amount of experience working in battleground states, in swing areas, and so they have teamed up to help us get a better understanding of what is going on in these 7 battleground states that we know are going to be the difference maker at every one of these states in determining who the next president of the United States will be. What you see up here is we've been taking, as I said, this is our third poll, so you can see the movement from where we were in May to where we are now is pretty dramatic, especially if you look at the number that where Harris stands now compared to where Biden was in May. In pretty much every single case, she has not just cut the lead, but cut it by a significant amount, or she's gone ahead of Trump. She's built on Biden's number pretty significantly. But if you look at just the difference between where we were a month ago in August and where we are now, there really hasn't been any top line movement. The race back, this is the overall number, is on the top. That number that you see, these are just the head-to-head numbers. The number that you see, 49-47, so Harris in the overall battleground states ahead by 2 points, which is exactly where we were at this point in August. And even if you look at the individual states, what you see, again, all the way to the right is it's all the way to the right is the head-to-head. The one all the way to the left includes third-party candidates. And what you see is there's really not much movement, just movement basically on the edges. With, in August, Harris narrowly ahead within the margin of error in all but 2 states, one in which she was tied, one in which Trump's leading in the margin of error. And basically, we see something similar in August, ahead in 5 of these states, tied in 1, and Trump ahead in the state of Georgia this time. And then, and we'll move it here, onto the Senate races. This is where, once again, doesn't look that much different from where we were a month ago. Senate Democrats continue to hold their own in these battleground areas. Note, we're just in those 7 battleground states. Georgia does not have a Senate or governor's race this year, so that is the generic ballot question that you see over there when we ask about head-to-head numbers In Georgia, down ballot. North Carolina, that number is for the governor's race. But as you can see, Democrats still leading in every single one of those Senate races. But what you'll notice, and we're going to talk about this when I sit down with the team in a little bit, is that the margin, especially in those so-called blue wall states in Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, has narrowed pretty significantly. So that while Alyssa Slotkin and Bob Casey and Tammy Baldwin still lead in those races, it's a much smaller lead than it was in August. Meanwhile, in those two Sunbelt states of Arizona, Nevada, and then the governor's race in North Carolina, Democrats building a much stronger lead. So it's kind of like the tale of two different campaigns here, with the presidential campaign in Arizona and Nevada incredibly close, while the Senate race is not close at all, Democrats winning pretty handily. North Carolina, also a dead heat there at the presidential level. But, and this is not particularly surprising, but the North Carolina governor's race turning into something of a blowout here, with Josh Stein, the Democrat, leading by 24 points over Mark Robinson. By the way, we went into the field with this poll the day that the CNN story broke, but it's also important to remember, and Jessica Taylor, who is our governor's editor, I'm sure we'll talk about this, but the ads against Mark Robinson, specifically attacking him for his position on abortion, had been running for quite some time before this story on CNN ever broke. So Robinson wasn't in a great place to begin with. He slipped even further. The other thing I wanted to talk about was to kind of get us underneath the top lines and to look really at the issues, because as we know, this is a very, I don't know how many different ways there are to say, this is a really, really close race for president, and that you're just not going to see much movement in these top line numbers for people who are desperate to see some shift, to see some sign that one candidate or the other has a decided advantage. You're going to be pretty disappointed. But what I am looking at is some of the more intangibles. Voters are looking for certain things from president. They are asking themselves certain questions about, you know, what kind of values, what kind of character, whether or not this candidate can handle certain issues better than the other candidate. I think those tell us a really good story, too, about the direction that this race is going. And what I found really notable in this most recent poll is you can see how much better Trump does overall on the economy. He's leading by 5 points on the question of who do you think would do a better job, which isn't any different from where he was back in August. But on the issue of who would do a better job on inflation, and by the way, inflation is the top issue when we ask voters in this poll of, you know, their top economic issue. Inflation is up there with 60% saying it's their top issue. He no longer has a lead. It is now even on that question. And even on immigration, and this is Trump's biggest advantage that he holds over Kamala Harris, that lead has shrunk too by about 5 points. And I think there are a couple things happening here. For border and immigration and the economy, things just in the big picture, outside of politics, outside of what the candidates are saying, just generally are looking a little bit better on both of those issues. Unlike, just looking at immigration, unlike where we were a year ago, we do not have the kind of influx and inflow of migrants on the border that we did. And that number has been steadily decreasing since the Biden administration came out this summer with more restrictive policies on who can claim asylum. And the numbers have dropped. The press coverage on migrants is no longer a top story. We don't have those pictures every day of chaos there at the border or migrants getting bused to different cities. So as it's out of the spotlight, I think that has helped Harris. considerably, though it's notable that in the border states of Nevada and Arizona, Trump still does have a double-digit lead on the question of who would do a better job on immigration. On the economy, I think there are a couple of reasons why Trump has lost his once 6-point lead on doing a better job on inflation. And that's this question of, do you think the inflation is getting worse, better, staying the same? And voters, let's be really clear, they're not in a great place when it comes to inflation. They are not optimistic about inflation. They're just less pessimistic. And so if you look at these three bars from May to August to September, if you add up the better and staying the same number, what you can see is that gradually, again, it's narrow, it's not dramatic, but fewer people in September than in May think things are getting a lot worse. Fewer people think it's getting a little bit worse. And you have a decent uptick of people who think things are getting better. And this slide, or the chart here to the right, also tells us the story of why an improving, or at least a less gloomy view of inflation is working for Harris. It's not just that she's winning over people who say that it's getting better. That's not surprising at all. But she's also winning over people who think it's staying the same. People who are basically meh about the economy, right? Like, it's not great, it's not bad, but it's meh. She's winning those voters. And even on getting a little bit worse, right? These are kind of pessimistic people. She's still pulling in 42% of those voters. So the only voters right now that are really significantly supportive of Donald Trump are those, and it's a big group of people, let's be clear, 35%, but that group of voters think things are getting a lot worse. They're voting overwhelmingly for Trump. And I do think that consumer optimism, we're starting to see it in other data points as well, whether it's the Michigan consumer confidence numbers, other polling showing this as well. So as people feel that the economy is getting either a little bit better or is not as bad, that I think has benefited Harris as well. I think, yes, that's the final slide there. I'll put it back to that. And so if we kind of go then and think about where this final group of voters, who are the people who right now are still undecided on this race? How do they see the next 30 days? What are they looking for to make their choice? I think you can put these, first of all, it's a very, very narrow group of people who are either undecided or say they're voting third party. In our survey right now, that's about 5% of all the voters combined in those 7 battleground states say that they are either undecided or thinking about voting for a third party candidate. When you drill down into who they are and what's important to them, I think the big takeaway for me is that they fit into the following categories. One, they are people who are more economically stressed than the overall electorate. These are folks who, while this number that I showed earlier with the how do you feel about the economy, getting better, worse, staying the same, 70% of these undecided voters say they think that inflation's getting a lot worse. So that's a pretty big jump from actually getting a lot or a little bit worse. So bigger than the overall electorate. So they are much more economically stressed, much more concerned about the economy, and they trust Trump much more on the economy than the overall electorate. But they also, as Patrick Toomey, who is one of the pollsters who works on this project, said the other day, it is these voters like Trump's policies, but they would like the policies implemented without Donald Trump, right? Like they want his policies, they don't really like him. And that's the central tension for these voters, trying to figure out how do we square that circle? How can I get the things I think he can do well, that Trump can do well, but minus all of the things that he does that I think are too extreme or chaotic, or his style of leadership is just not, in the direction that I would like to see, not the way I'd like to see a president act. Another way to think about these swing voters is they fall into this category, and we've segmented these voters out in our polling into voters that, again, they say that they like Trump's policies, they don't like him personally. Overall, in this sample of the battleground electorate, that's about 17 to 20%. So you've got a fixed number, about 35% of voters say they are ride or die Donald Trump, right? They love it. They like him, they like his policies, they aren't going anywhere. That is his core base. Then you've got about 47% of the electorate who do not like Donald Trump. They are the hardcore anti-Trump base. Those guys are kind of settled. So this group in the middle, this 17 to 20% who say, like his policies, don't really like him, they are, interestingly enough, one thing that we found about who they are, they span sort of the demographic, divide here, but they are disproportionately Latino and Latino men who feel this way. Now, this is the reason that we're talking so much about them, and in fact, you probably hear the most about it from Republicans. If you've watched the Sunday shows recently and you see Republicans on there basically pleading with Donald Trump, they'll say, if you just stick to the issues, man, we can win, right? You see Lindsey Graham on there almost every Sunday. He's better on the economy, he's better on immigration, he's better on jobs, he can do all these things. Please just keep talking about that. Don't talk about Harris's mental capacity. Don't talk about eating pets. Don't talk about Hunter Biden's laptop, right? Just the economy, because these people want to vote for you. These people are literally saying, I could vote for Donald Trump's policies. I just don't want to see his behavior back in the White House, or the way that some of them saying that they see him as more extreme than they do see Harris. So that is the key element for the Trump campaign going forward. For Harris, the key, and looking through all this data and watching these trend lines for the past 2 months here since she's been in the race, it seems clear she's been able to do a couple of things really well. And that most important thing she's done well is separating herself from Biden. For those of us who know the meme, it's like she fell out of a coconut tree, okay? She's very much unburdened by what has been. She continues to have a higher favorable rating, not just higher than Joe Biden, but higher than Donald Trump overall in these swing states. She is seen sort of across the board much better than Biden on a whole host of these issues. Again, we don't have the May numbers up from where Biden was on the question of who do you think would do a better job on the economy or on inflation or on immigration. But he was trailing by double digits, and she is now ahead on those issues. She's also seen as capable, as somebody who is a leader. Now, voters still do see her as somebody who's too liberal. About 52% think that she's too liberal to govern effectively. But overall, she's been able to make the case for herself that she could get the job done. And that was really something we didn't really know how voters were going to react to, somebody they didn't really know very well, coming into this job at the last minute, taking over as the nominee, and whether they could see her being president. And that's one other number I wanted to highlight, was the question we asked about who do you think will win the election. Not who are you voting for, but we asked the voters, who do you think will win? The reason you ask that question is it really gets at the kind of, again, going with memes here, kind of the vibe that's out there. How are people feeling about this election? What are people hearing about this election? What are they getting back from their community or the interactions that they're having with people about politics? When they were hearing about politics back in May, most of it was negative about Biden. And so there was an advantage on that question for Donald Trump. Who do you think will win? Donald Trump was ahead. It wasn't by a tremendous margin, but he was ahead. When we asked it again in August, Donald Trump, again, ahead by a smaller margin than he was over Biden, but ahead. Today, Harris is ahead on that question, I think by about 9 or 10 points. And that doesn't mean that she is going to win. What it means is that she, in my mind, she has passed the bar that had been set by many voters about whether she could actually do the job. And part of the job of the Trump campaign was to make her look unacceptable, inexperienced, unable to do this job. And I think what she and her campaign have been able to do is to actually push back on that and position her in a pretty good spot, at least with some of those weary and wary voters. She hasn't completely sold everybody on this. That's what the next 30 days are. And in fact, I think for her, the biggest challenge for the next 30 days is to continue to be seen by voters as somebody who is turning the page from both Trump and Biden. If you watched the VP debate last night, you'll notice how many times that Senator Vance called the current administration the Harris administration, tried to link Harris as much as possible with Biden because they are working very hard to make the case that she is not a turn the page. She is a continuation of the page. As one of Trump's advisors said the other day, it's hard to turn the page when you're actually just in the same book that you've always been in, right? You're just turning the page from the same book that you've been reading. So that being able to prove that she is a steady leader and that she's turning the page, I think you're going to hear a lot more about that in the coming days, as well as ensuring that the focus stays on Donald Trump, who he is personally, and trying to make the case that a return to Donald Trump would be going backwards, as you know, that's part of her theme.